everyone. Hi everyone. This is a quick little video to help you get to know your camera, which is the Canon PowerShot SX160. It's a great little camera to start out with if this is your first time really delving into exposure modes and apertures and shutter speeds and things like that. So let's go ahead and get started. I'm just going to talk to you guys a little bit about the different modes that your camera is capable of and how to change your apertures. So let's talk about your camera modes. Your PowerShot has the ability to use a manual mode, which is basically a requirement for anyone who is a photographer. It gives you total control over the image that you're taking. So when you're in manual mode, the camera lets you do everything. It lets you select the aperture or the f-stop that you want to use. It lets you select the ISO, and it also lets you select the shutter speed. The second mode that you're going to find helpful is aperture priority, which also on this particular camera the mode is marked with AV, which stands for aperture value mode, but they mean the same thing. In this mode, it's a program mode, so it will let you select the aperture, but then the camera will select everything else based on the light that's in the scene. So if you tell the camera I want to use an f8 and you want to use an f8 because it has a good depth of field, then the camera will actually take a meter reading, which we'll talk about in the next video, and it will select a shutter speed and an ISO that's appropriate for that aperture. The next mode is, well, the TV stands for time value, but most photographers know this as shutter priority mode, which means it's kind of the opposite of the aperture priority mode. In this situation, you would select the shutter speed that you want to use. Let's say you wanted to use a 1/60th of a second because you're going to hand hold the camera. If you select that shutter speed in this mode, your camera will take another meter reading and it will select the aperture and the ISO that is appropriate for that image. The other modes on this camera you can definitely play around with, and actually when you shoot your scenes, when you create your mock scenes for class, you're probably going to shoot in program mode, which is P, which is an automatic mode. Or you can shoot on the green one, which is auto, and that the camera will basically decide what aperture it needs, what shutter speed it needs. Now, is that ideal for crime scene photography? Not necessarily, but we do actually use that mode a lot in the real world. Why is that? Because usually we'll set an aperture and say, okay, let's just use that. We want to use an f8 because that's good for crime scene photography. It's got a good depth of field. We'll just go ahead and shoot. So we can set that in program mode, or we could use aperture priority mode. But for this class, I want you guys to be able to use the manual modes, right? Manual, aperture priority, and shutter speed priority, or time value priority, to get to know your exposure controls. But for a majority of your scene shots, you'll probably be shooting on an auto mode. Here is a little caveat or warning that I wanted to let you guys know about for the SX160. Usually in manual mode, if you're in manual mode, your DSLR camera will have a bunch of different controls, and you can use those to switch the aperture and to switch the shutter speed while in manual mode. With this camera, to change the aperture, even if you want to shoot in manual mode, you need to switch over to AV mode first. So this is what it looks like on your camera. You're going to go ahead and put your little indicator dot there, the white dot, onto AV, and that'll put you into aperture value or aperture priority mode. And this is what the back of your camera will look like. So in this situation, I'm set to an f8. If I wanted to change the aperture, I would go ahead use your thumb or your finger to rotate the little dial here, okay, around the function and set button. You can rotate to the right or to the left. And in this situation, I've opened up a few stops and I've changed to a f4.5. You'll notice that with all digital cameras, they don't really follow the f-stop continuum that you guys are going to learn in class. They let you do half stops and things like that. So just be aware that this camera isn't going to follow that continuum to the letter, but it will let you open up and close down your f-stops. So once you do this in aperture priority mode, if you switch back to manual mode using the dial on the top of the camera, your aperture will then be set at an f4.5.